Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this tour of EdData. My name is Smita Patel, and I'm joined by my colleagues, Christine Davis of the California Department of Education School Fiscal Services Division, and Gurpreet Mangat of FICMAT CSIS. Also joining us behind the scenes are Amy Fong, the Chief Operations Officer of FICMAT CSIS, and Andrew Reed of EdSource. I just want to provide a quick introduction. EdData is a partnership of the California Department of Education, FICMAT CSIS, and EdSource. Our sole mission is to make California K-12 public school data easy to use and access for as wide an audience as possible. All the data on the site are free. We have no commercial or advocacy interests of any kind. So EdData is available at ed-data.org, which hopefully everyone can see up there in the URL bar. And on the home page, you'll see that there are a number of different ways to get to the data. At the top of every page, there's a search box that you can use to type in the name of a school district or county. And for example, if I started with San Jose, it would bring up all the things and you could select it and get to it directly from there. We also have a menu up here that allows you to go through the different levels. We call that the white menu. And for example, if you were viewing a school report, you could actually jump up to the district level just by clicking on that. You can also get to the comparisons from here, the school and district comparisons. In the middle is the marquee that highlights what's new on the site. And over here we have what we call the red menu, which enables you to select data from the for a county, and then a district, and then a school. And you have to remember to click the Go button. And we have some articles down here that try to provide some background explanations and information about the data that we have most recently posted. So let's go to the state report so I can give you a quick overview before we hand it over to Christine of the vast array of data we have on EdData. Up here you can see that we have the California public schools. At the school level, it would be the name of the school and the address and contact information. The list of counties over here enables you to see all the counties in the state. And if you were looking at a county level report, it would show you the districts, and at the district level, it would show you the schools. And as you can see, we have a number of tabs across the top. There's student data, staff data, local revenue, election data, and then the financial data. And within the student data, we have demographics, performance, college and career readiness, and suspensions and expulsions. So let's start with demographics. While that loads, you also have these. Sometimes the graphs jump around, but that's actually a feature where you can move them around if you want to view them in a certain order. We have a lot of data that's sort of hidden behind the first level. So over here you see the enrollment graph. You can actually use this drill in to drill in and see more detailed data. And you can use this % number toggle button to change the view. If you want to see the numbers behind the graph, you can mouse over, but you can also expand the table data down here and see the data. And of course, when you change between the number and %, that will change it accordingly. We have added a new filter to the enrollment graph, which offers you the ability to view enrollment by charter or traditional district school enrollment, which is something that many of our users had asked for. So that's now available. Down here we have chart notes, which it's our way of providing context or giving you caveats about the data. If you see text in green, that means it's a glossary term, and if you click it, it opens up this glossary panel in the right corner, which you can open or close from any page on the site by clicking on it. So in and I'm not quite sure why it should show them 3 apart, but sometimes depending on the level of zoom, the graphs adjust. And this is to make it responsive so that even if you look at it on a cell phone, you can see the full graph. So as you can see, we have a number of demographic data elements here. There's enrollment with all these subgroups. There's average daily attendance, which is used to calculate funding for schools. Christine will talk more about this. ADA is only available at the district level. There's also the unduplicated pupil count of free reduced price meals, English learners, foster youth, also homeless and migrant youth, which is used for the calculation under the local control funding formula. Then we have data on free and reduced price meals, English learners, English learner, English language acquisition status, and a number of others. Now to go to the next section, you can close demographics by clicking on it, and we can go into performance. And here we have the Casp, which are the standardized statewide tests data. And this really challenged us. We had to become quite innovative in order to provide Casp data in a way that we felt would be useful to you, because there are 4 different performance levels for Casp. So when you're dealing with a student group that has multiple groups, for example, grade, it becomes difficult to show 4 levels of data plus 5 years. And so we have created what we call the double drill-in. So for example, you could look at the literacy results for a single grade, and then you select the grade in the second menu. Or you can look at the literacy results by grade for a certain single achievement level. So for example, you can just look at the students who exceeded, or if you want to look at met or exceeded standards, you can do that. Again, you can expand the view table data to see the actual numbers. You're also able to export that table over here. These are the sharing tools. You can share to Facebook. You can create a link to the graph, or copy it, or email it, save it, print it. And we have the similar graph. This is English language arts, and then there's mathematics. There's also physical fitness data included in the performance section. Then if we go down to college and career readiness, we have recently added cohort graduation data, dropout data, and data for the students, the graduates who met the A through G course requirements that are needed for admission to UC-CSU. And if you're wondering where the rest of the data are, the state recently changed how the cohort is calculated, and that made the data for 2016 and on no longer comparable to prior years. And so we had to create new graphs, but these are much, much richer graphs than we've had in the past. And you can actually see data for additional student groups that we didn't have before, such as foster youth, homeless students, and students with disabilities. And again, we have added a charter filter, so you can also look at the data for students based on whether they're attending charter schools or traditional district schools. And this is the same across all 3 of these graphs. In the college and career readiness section, we also have data on SAT, ACT, AP. And then we have a suspensions and expulsions section, which we have not been able to keep updated because of changes to the data after we built the graphs. But we are very close to introducing some new suspensions and expulsions and suspensions and expulsions and chronic absenteeism graphs. So hopefully we'll be bringing those to you very soon. So let me pop over to the staff data, and for that I'm going to go to Davis Joint Unified School District in Yolo County. And because we don't, staff data, are, at least teacher salary data, are primarily at the district level. And I'm jumping down to teacher salary data, although we do have staff demographic data, but these data, we're still trying to get the 17-18 data in order to update the graphs. We hope to have those very soon, so we'll let you know when that information is available. But since our focus is on teacher salaries and financial data today, I just wanted to show you what we have here. Teacher salary data comes from the J90 survey, which is a voluntary form submitted by districts. So not all districts submit teacher salary data, but the vast majority do. And again, here in the teacher salaries, you can drill in to see the full salary schedule, and it provides the average for this district, as well as the average for all districts, and the average for unified school districts. So it gives you a kind of context for the data for this district versus how it compares to other districts in the state. Similarly, you can see how teacher salaries have changed. You can also get some details on contributions for benefits. And down here we have service and teaching days. So with that, I would like to hand it over to Christine so she can walk us through the financial data.
So thank you everyone for joining and your interest in the financial data. Before I go into the drop-down menus with the various financial information, I just wanted to give a brief overview of the data. So this data is collected by the California Department of Education every year. School districts, county offices of education, and charter schools are required to submit their financial data to us by October 15th each year for the previous fiscal year. The data is unaudited, so any adjustments to the data as a result of the school district's audit would not be reflected in this data. That happens later on. And also the data is reported in the standardized account code structure, or SAC format. So that's the multi-dimensional account string that consists of 7 fields, and it's used by LEAs to classify their revenues, expenditures, assets, and liabilities. So with that said, I just want to provide a couple of caveats to that information. So first of all, we don't collect school level financial data. So when I say school level, I mean the regular schools within a school district. We don't collect that level of data. We're only collecting data at the district level, except that we do collect charter school data, but the exception with that is that you will not see charter school data displayed on ed data, and that is because charter schools have some flexibility in how they report their financial data. They can report it individually using the SAC structure. They can also report their financial data with their authorizing school district or county office of education. So that would mean there's no way for us to disaggregate their data from their authorizing district or county office of education. And they also have another format they can use that's very high level, and it doesn't crosswalk well with the SACS format. So for those reasons, we just you're not going to see the charter school data reported or displayed here on Ed Data. Okay, so if you'll look on the screen, I have Davis Joint Unified pulled up. So this is a school district. When I'm done reviewing the school district data, I will briefly show you how you can look at the state level financial data and also the county office financial data. Okay, so the first thing you'll see when you're on the financial data screen, so again, here we are in financial data. Smita already went through, you know, there's information regarding this district, the student information, staff, and local revenue elections. So here's the financial data. You'll see that you can choose whatever fiscal year you want to view financial data for. So the latest year is 17-18, but it does, if you keep scrolling this way, you can, to the left, you can actually go all the way back to 2009-10. So right now we do have data, financial data here for 2009-10 through 2017-18, but I'm going to focus on the 17-18 data. So we have 4 categories of financial data that are displayed. The first category is revenue and expenditures. So if you click on the plus sign, the first type of data you're going to see is the fund data. So what this does is show you for each category of funds that the school district might report financial data for, you're going to see some very high level information. So first of all, what is a fund? So a fund is actually, it's like a financial reporting entity. It's a self-balancing set of accounts, and the LEAs or school districts' financial resources and uses of those resources along with their assets and liabilities and residual ending balance are reported in the funds. So, and this is kind of it's more of an accounting concept, but like I said, there's a few different categories of funds. We have governmental funds, proprietary funds, and fiduciary funds. So what Ed data is displaying for these particular funds is very high level. What it's showing us is the adjusted beginning fund balance, total revenues, total expenditures, other financing sources, uses, and ending balance. So you can actually click here. Anytime you see blue text with a little down arrow, you can click on that, and it will show you the detail within the fund. So general fund, technically there's only one fund within that fund range, 01 through 08. So that's all you're going to see there. But if we go down to the special revenue funds, 09 through 20. So if we click the drop arrow there, you can see that there are several fund types defined within the special revenue fund category of funds. So you'll see for Davis, they actually report a charter school special revenue fund. They've got an adult ed fund, child development, cafeteria. So you can see, again, they have activity in these funds. For ed data purposes, we don't display all of the detail that we're going to be seeing for the general fund, but at least it gives you an idea of, okay, so they've got a charter school fund, they're reporting some charter school activity, they've got cafeteria, you know, food service activities, so you can see that they are operating those programs. Okay, so, and then the same, so then we can minimize the special revenue funds, and then we see we've got capital project funds. Again, we see Davis actually does operate a couple of capital project funds. So I'll minimize that. Debt service as well, they pay, so debt service funds are paying debt service on some long-term debt, so they operate those funds as well. Okay, so once we get done looking at the funds, so I'm sorry, we've got, so again, this is one of those general categories of funds, so the governmental funds, and we have 2 other categories of funds, proprietary funds. And just to explain as well, there are the notes for each of these tables that give you a brief overview of what you're going to find in these particular categories. So this table shows the proprietary funds. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on these. They don't operate. So you're seeing zeros here. That means that this particular district doesn't operate those funds. You're going to see, well, as we go throughout, that a lot of the lines of data are going to show zeros. The way Ed data is set up is it does display any particular you know, expenditure or activity or fund. If any LEAs are reporting that, it's going to show up in the table, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the particular school district that you're looking at is going to have activity for that particular financial account. Okay, and then internal service funds. So they do operate a self-insurance fund, so we see activity there. So I'll minimize these. And then finally, fiduciary funds. Those are basically any funds that the district is holding in trust. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail there, but we can see that they operate a foundation private purpose trust fund. So that tells me that maybe they're getting some type of donation where they've got a formal trust agreement and that specifies how they should spend those dollars. Okay, so after the fund types, then we're going to go into the other category of financial information that's displayed in this tab is general fund revenues by source. So what this shows us, this is showing us the revenue that the district receives, and it's showing us that information by resource code. So in the SAC structure, we have established resource codes, which they're kind of like mini funds. So for each type of funding that the school district receives, there is a particular resource code that they use to account for that revenue source and the expenditures associated with that revenue source. And it's broken out between unrestricted sources. So unrestricted sources basically means that the LEA can use those dollars for general education purposes. There really aren't many or any restrictions on how they use those funds other than they should be using them for their education, generally their education programs and support of their education programs. And then we have unrestricted sources. So the unrestricted resources are established for any particular source of funding that does have restrictions on how it's used. So the granting agency, whether it's California Department of Education or a federal government, they have restrictions on how those funds are used. So there is a restricted resource code established for those sources of funds. So I will click on the unrestricted sources and show you in that category, we have a general unrestricted 0000 resource. We've got lottery. This one is obsolete, and education protection account. So these are our unrestricted sources of funds, and the reason we have specific codes under unrestricted resources for these particular programs is that there is a reporting requirement. So the school district needs to be able to identify revenues and expenditures associated with those funds so that they can fulfill their reporting requirement. So again, here we have some highlighted blue text with a drop-down arrow. So if we click there, you can see that we have the detail of revenues and expenditures for this particular funding source. So this is Davis's all their unrestricted dollars. So in their unrestricted pot of funding, they've got their local control funding formula sources. So that's their main general purpose source of funding. That is definitely the bulk of the dollars they receive. They get $53 million they reported for 17-18, but there are also a couple of other sources, federal, state, and local, that could also be unrestricted. So you'll see they have a few fund revenue sources there as well. And then they've got financing sources and contributions. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail with that. Typically, you're seeing here just the districts, which is common. They oftentimes will contribute unrestricted dollars to restricted programs to cover deficits in those programs. So then we also can see the expenditures of unrestricted dollars. So Ed Data does break that out by category. So you can see certificated, classified salaries, benefits, books and supplies, services, capital outlay, etc. And we will go into, because we will be looking at in detail at the expenditures by object a little bit later on, so we will look at these. We'll look at some of the more specific types of expenditures within each of these categories. So I'm going to minimize this, but you're going to see that for any of the revenue sources that the district receives, you're going to be able to click on this highlighted blue text and drop it down and see the revenue received and the associated expenditures. So for their education protection account, they've recorded certificated personnel salaries and employee benefits. That's what they're using their education protection account dollars for. And then under our, I'm not going to expand this range is basically obsolete, this restricted revenue limit sources. So we've got our federal resources. And you'll see there, when you click on the drop down, you'll see again a long list of federal programs. And for any of the programs that Davis does operate, so Title I is a big federal program that most school districts do receive funding for that program, so they do get Title I, so we can drop down on Title I. And again, we can see that they have federal revenue, which makes sense because it's a federal funding source. So there's their $733,000 of revenue they recognize in 17-18, and then the associated expenditures for that program. So they've got pretty much expenditures in every single expenditure category: salaries, benefits, books and supplies, etc. So this is just a nice way to, for any district, if you want to know how they're spending their Title I dollars, and you can come here and get to the appropriate program code and drop down and see the information. And then one other thing I will mention here, so what we're over here to the right, we've got dollars per student based on ADA. So what we're doing here is this district has average daily attendance, which is basically the number of days of student attendance for the entire year divided by the total days taught. So this district's ADA for 17-18 was 7,695. So we're displaying these revenue and expenditures in terms of dollars per ADA. So you can see, for example, for their total unrestricted sources, Davis, we're calculating $10,059 per ADA. And you can compare that to the average percent for all unified districts in the state. So this tells us that Davis's per ADA amount for total unrestricted sources is 96% of state average. And that's here we're displaying in terms of a percentage. Here we're displaying in terms of dollars. So the statewide average for unified districts is 10,450. Davis is a little bit less than that, so we get a percentage that's a little bit less than 100%. And then it also gives us a statewide average dollar amount for all school districts within the state. So, pretty close here. Davis is pretty close to average on how much they receive per ADA. So again, that information is displayed for each category of revenues. And right, just for the particular category of funding or the program. So I'm going to minimize the federal, and I'm not going to go into any more detail. I'm just going to drop down really quick on the state sources so you can see, again, here I was talking about, lots of zero amounts. Ed Data displays all the resources for the whole state, depending on which LEAs report which program. So a lot of these programs Davis doesn't operate, at least in their general fund, because I see child development right here. Well, child development is actually accounted for primarily in a different fund, so we're not going to see a lot of child development expenditures in the general fund. So we see, you know, clean energy jobs, et cetera, lottery instructional materials. And again, any of these, you can click on the highlighted number and drop it down and see revenues and expenditures associated with that program. Okay. And then finally, we have in this particular section, year-end summary for general fund. This is just basically components of ending balance. So districts typically do not spend all they receive in any given year. They have what we call carryover. So when they have carryover, that is characterized as their ending balance. So in their ending fund balance, they identify certain parts of that ending fund balance for specific purposes, like you know, obviously for our restricted programs, those balances are restricted and they can only use it for the purposes of those programs. But on the unrestricted side, they can identify certain funds that they know they're going to use for specific purposes in future years, and so they don't want to just make that, you know, available for any other purpose. So we either assign it or commit it, and then finally reserve for economic uncertainties. Districts are required to maintain a minimum level of reserve, so a savings account, you know, in case they run into anticipated shortfalls. So that's this reserve for economic uncertainties. Okay, so any questions? Are there any questions in this section?
Yes, Christine.
Yeah.
Eric has a question. He said, if I were looking for funds specifically allocated to after-school programs, after-school time, where can he find that?
Okay, so I believe there are a couple of after-school programs. Let me see. I think I know there's definitely, I don't know. I don't recall. I know there's a federal one, but I know there are a couple schools, like After School Education and Safety, ACES. That's the big program. That's the big state program for after school. Davis in particular doesn't appear to operate that program, but there is that program. So you could look that up this way. You could also go on the Department of Education. If you're looking just mainly for program information, you could go on CDE's website and in the search, search for after school programs, and that would come up. But for any particular school district and whether or not they get specific after school program dollars, then you need to you could look through this list. Again, here's After School Education and Safety. That's the big one that I'm aware of. I mean, there might be other programs that allow after school expenditures, but we don't have any account codes that specifically identify after school expenditures. Okay, anything else?
That's it.
Okay, then I'm going to go on to general fund revenues. So in this section, general fund revenues by object code. So in the previous section, we had revenues identified by resource. So here we're kind of switching it around and we're identifying our revenues by object code. So here are our LCFS sources. If we drop down there, we see there are two components to LCFS sources. We have the state aid component, so that's the amount the state provides in terms of the local control funding formula. So there's a state contribution amount, so that's what you're seeing there. And then the local property taxes make up the other part of LCFS. So that's so we have that broken out here. And then if you actually click on this highlight right here, then this gives you the detail. This gives you the detail of the local property taxes. I'm not going to take any time to explain any of these specific components. Just know here we have these three are showing us the state aid portion, and then the rest of it is the local tax portion. I would like to mention something here. You'll see this little orange question mark. Anytime you want an explanation or a description of what a code means, if you click on that orange question mark, over to the right, our account code glossary pops up, and so you'll see here, here's 8011, LCFF state aid, so it gives a description of this particular revenue source, and you can see that for any of these other local revenues. And you can, to close it, you just click on that close panel right there. And I'm going to minimize that. And so the same thing, we've got our federal revenues. So whereas above we saw federal revenues by resource code, here it's actually by object code, which is the type of federal revenue. You'll see that there's a couple of big special education revenue sources. And then this one here is this all other federal revenue. This is kind of a catch-all for most of their other federal revenue sources, because you can always identify a specific federal revenue source primarily through the resource code. Okay, and then state sources, same thing, drop down. It gives you the types of state revenue sources. Again, this is also primarily identifiable through the SACS resource code that we saw above. Again, you've got your orange question marks where you can find descriptions for each of the sources. Close that, and then the graph. So this is something, now that we're in these categories of general fund revenues, and we'll see it in expenditures as well, we have our graphs. So we've got two graphs associated with revenues. We've got per student revenue trends. So this is trending revenues for this district from 2013-14 through 2017-18. You'll see that there are three different categories. It's average of all districts, average unified, and average of this district. So, you know, these lines get kind of squeezed together. It's kind of hard to tell which is which. So there's a couple, you can filter the data. So you could always take out average of all districts and average of unified. So you can just see this district's data, or you can check all to have it all. You can also view the table data. So again, these are kind of hard to see exactly what the amount is. They're pretty close together. So you can always actually view the table data and see the actual amount per year. So you can see how it trends up by just looking at these amounts. And chart notes describes what you're seeing. And then source is just, it tells you it did come from CDEs, our division, and our unaudited actuals data collection. So there's that, and then there's also general fund revenue by category. So this is just a nice graphical display of, you could kind of visually see how much of their revenue came from each revenue category for each year. So you can see overall revenue did trend up, but of course the bulk of that revenue is LCFF, and that makes total sense. That is the bulk of most districts' revenue source. So this is displayed by dollar amount, but you can also switch it to percentage. So you can see that LCFF has pretty much made up, you know, around 70% of the district's revenue sources. Okay, so any questions on the revenue? And also, we also have the ADA, the amounts displayed by ADA over here on the right-hand side as well.
We don't have any questions, Christine.
Okay, so I'm going to go on to general fund expenditures. I've only got a couple minutes left. Oops, sorry. Data table. So the same concept with the expenditures. So here we are displaying expenditures by object code. So you can drop down for any of the categories. So our first category is certificated personnel salaries, and you can see we have within that category specific types of certificated salaries. So we have teachers, obviously that is the primary expenditure type of certificated salaries, or pretty much salaries in general for a school district. And then there's certificated pupil support. Again, you can click on the orange icon, question mark icon, and it will describe what types of positions are recorded in those particular object codes. And then same, we've got classified salaries, drop down you can see the different types of classified salaries, instructional versus support versus technical or clerical and supervisorial. Same thing, any of these you can see, you can compare a per ADA amount for this district versus the statewide numbers. For that district type or for all districts, you can get an idea of how this district spends in these categories compared to other districts in the state. Employee benefits. So we've got several types of employee benefits. We've got our pension expenditures for PERS and STRS. There's Medicare, your Social Security, health and welfare, etc. Same thing. Any of these you can drop down, or you can click and get the description of that. We've got, employee salaries and benefits definitely make up the bulk of the district's expenditures, and we'll see that in the graph. Categories, books and supplies, same thing. Drop down, you can see the various types of expenditures, services and other operating expenditures. There's lots of different types of expenditures in that category. And so then I'm going to jump to the graphs really quick. Per student expenditure trends. So this graph is showing you the per student expenditures over the last 5 years, and again, this line's pretty tight. They're kind of right in line with all the other unified districts and districts throughout the state. So we do provide the actual numerical values so you get a better picture of that. We also have general fund expenditures by category. So obviously it's giving you that nice graphical bar, bar display of our different categories of expenditures. Again, here you see, if you're looking at your certificated salaries, classified salaries, and your employee benefits, and you also get to hover and see that, those make up the bulk of a district's expenditures. And you can see that percentage-wise as well. If you look here, certificated, classified salaries, employee benefits, just for personnel, how much of a district's expenditures go towards those categories. And then finally, we have our unrestricted salary and benefits, the unrestricted salary and benefit cost to unrestricted expenditures ratio. So this, again, this is that nice representation. Here's your percentages. This, the districts and as well as all districts throughout the state. Your personnel benefits, personnel costs are a pretty big chunk of your district's expenditures. We're looking 88%, 88% for this district. So in 17-18, they spent 88% of their resources on salaries and benefits. Okay, current expense, really quick. So this is a specific calculation that CDE is required to perform. It's called current expense of education. It doesn't take into consideration all of the LEA's expenditures. It's a statutory calculation. So basically, it's just another way to show, expenditures per ADA. Again, shows you the ADA for this district, and then the actual current expense per ADA for this district, statewide average for this type of district, and statewide average for all districts. And we do give you a graph to, again, show that kind of graphical representation of how this number has trended over the last 5 years, and it does give you again, average all unified districts and statewide as well. And then we do have general fund by activity. So object code tells you what type of expenditure you had, whereas activity shows you the, well, I guess the activity. So we have instructions, and we call those function in the standardized account code structure. So the activities are instruction, instruction-related pupil services, ancillary services, etc. So instruction's an important one. So again, click on this orange question mark and you can get a description of what is included, what's considered instruction. So for Davis, you can see again a large chunk of their expenditures are on regular instruction, but they also have, there's also special education instruction. So we can get a definition for those, but they do also have a good amount of special education expenditures. Again, ability to compare statewide numbers. And then instruction related services. So that includes like program administration, that would include your instructional library and media. It includes your school admin, so like the school level expenditures. And then we also have pupil services, excuse me. Again, you know, guidance and counseling, psychological. So I mean, basically there's a ton of information here. You can just play around with it to your heart's content. So then the final, then we have our general fund charter school cost by program. So this is, program means goal code. So the goal code defines the population of students. So we generally look at our instructional goals. Again, there's several different instructional goals that the LEAs are using to record their expenditures. You've got regular ed, alternative schools. I'm not going to go through all these. Special education, that's a huge one. So again, you can get the definition for any of these. So another way to look at the expenditure data. And then finally, this category, general fund, other financing sources, uses. This is just kind of not really expenditures, but you know, you might see a general obligation bond proceeds recorded here. They move money in and out of different funds, and so you'll see those transactions here. So I think I've gone over just a little bit. So are there any other questions?
No questions yet.
Okay.
Thank you, Christine. And I think people are really appreciating the detail you provided. So is there anything you feel like you wanted to cover and didn't? Because I think we can afford to spend a minute or two more.
Okay. No, I don't think so. I think I'd maybe just like to leave with a little note on expenditures. So you see that there's a lot of different ways you can view the data, especially expenditure data. You could look at look at it by type of expenditure, by activity, by the population served. But we always like to just remind our data users that districts vary greatly in their size, in their location, in their demographic makeup. So while you're looking at these numbers and maybe looking at some of the, statewide averages for different types of districts, and then SMIT is going to be getting into comparisons, just remember that you need to look at what's behind those numbers. So it just caution, don't make assumptions, oh my goodness, my district, why are we not spending this much on our special ed program? It's just important to really dive in and get context for the expenditure information and not just take it all at face value, because districts have a lot of background information, a lot of, again, their demographics, they've got their own personal stories that go behind these numbers. So it's really important to look into that as well. So that's it. Unless did I miss anything?
No, thank you, Christine. That is, especially this final note, I think is really important context, and I appreciate it. Appreciate your really thorough showing of this. One question we did have from folks is about whether they can download the data in the financial report. So I'm going to just take over the sharing.
Okay, sure.
And
before you take away, there is a question from Brian. He's asking, will we be able to see supplemental funding and concentration funding amounts?
Oh, good question.
That's a great question, and I think it's a common question too. And no, you cannot. You can't see supplemental and concentration funding in the SACS financial data. We do not have specific SACS. I mean, I would characterize it as if we were going to identify that funding, it would be through the resource code, and we do not have resource codes established for supplemental and concentration grant funding. So you're not going to see specific expenditures for that. You can, if you want to know a district, if you just want to know a district's supplemental and concentration grant amounts, you can go on the CDE website, and it's our principal apportionment funding page, and you have to dig into the school district funding exhibits so that you can see their supplemental and concentration grant amounts through the funding exhibits. But associated expenditures cannot be derived from the financial data.
Is that something you think might be available in the future, or not sure yet?
Probably, okay. Probably not, unless there becomes some kind of a state. If the legislature mandates us to set up coding to track those expenditures, then we would do that. But as of right now, we don't have any plans to set something up in SACS to track separately.
And this, of course, all these data you've showed us are running off of SACS. So I apologize. It does look like we're going to need to run a little bit over. Invite those of you who are able to stick with us to do so. If you can't, we will post a recording of this webinar. This is just that principal apportionment snapshot that Christine mentioned, I think. Did I come to the right spot?
Yeah, actually, this is better, and I'm sorry I forgot about this. This is much better. So that, so yeah, on the left, LCFF target entitlement, supplemental grants. So you'll see supplemental grant funding and concentration grant funding. So that's where you can find those numbers. I'm not sure what year this is for. Just be careful too. Do we know what year this is? Oh, it is 18-19. Okay, yeah. So I think, because we had a transition phase when LCFF was implemented, so there's always been a supplemental grant and concentration grant dollar amount calculated for LEAs, but they have not been receiving that. And I think this fiscal year is the year they've actually become 100% funded, which means they are receiving their full supplemental and concentration grant dollars as calculated and shown here.
Okay, great. All right, so then I just want to pop back in here. A few people asked about whether you can download the data and the graphs. So there's this green Excel button up here, and it should download it, including whatever you have expanded for a table. So you can take a quick look at it here. And the other place you can export data are in the, so here you can see that the instruction data table that I had expanded is also visible over here. So the comparisons are another way that you can export the data. And of course, if you are familiar with Access, you can download the entire databases from the CDE website. But the goal here with that data is to just make it a little easier to access. Of course, that means we may not have everything. So are there any other questions about the financial data while we're here before we go on to comparisons?
No.
Okay, great. So there are a couple of ways, again, that one can move to comparisons, that you can go there from this menu, or if you want to keep Davis Joint Unified or whatever district you're looking at in view, you can click the symbol over here and it will take you to the district comparison page, and there's a corresponding symbol on the school page for school comparisons. And what it does is it takes you to comparisons and it pins the district you were looking at, so it will always stay here in the first column no matter how you change your comparison criteria. Now, just a quick orientation of the comparison section. You have district and school comparisons. You can change with that button. You have the year range. You can use these buttons to change that. You have the ability to export whatever is displayed in your comparison, and you can create a link if you want to send that comparison to someone or to bookmark it for yourself with the selections you've made. The previous next allows you to go from one screen to the next, because obviously we can only show five districts in one screen. And this number here shows how many results have been returned, meaning how many districts are coming up. So right now we haven't made any selections, and therefore it's showing 1,030. But you can limit that. For example, if we only want to see regular high school, elementary, unified districts and not include common admin districts or county offices of education, can save that. So now you can see that it's come down to 944. You can also restrict your comparison geographically by using the county name option. So for example, if we wanted to just look at Alameda County, you could click that and save. And it will still keep any districts you pinned. So Davis Joint Unified is in Yolo County, but because we pinned it, it will remain here. But all the other ones have now been changed to Alameda, and you can see that there are 18 results returned. Now, there are a ton of data elements that we managed to squeeze into comparisons, and you can see all of them here. You actually have to expand a second time in order to see everything. But to make it more manageable, we've tried to break it out into sections. I want to quickly interrupt myself and add, somebody had asked a question about whether you can include the ID number for districts or schools. So up here in the summary section, you can add the CDS number. And that will include that if you export the data. It makes it easier if you want to merge files or compare data files. Now, another way you can limit your comparison is by certain data elements. So for example, if you want to look at other districts that are around the same size as Davis Joint Unified, you might decide to look at, let's see, that's 8,000. So you could say between 8,000 and 10,000. And it's usually easier to type it in rather than. And that has brought us down to 2 because we had reduced our comparison to just Alameda County. Now, if you change your mind and you don't want to, you can just move the slider back and save it. So any questions so far? I apologize. I know I'm racing through this. I'm trying to.
No questions.
Okay, great. Again, with demographics, you can also use it based on other things. If you want to look at the percent of English learners and find other districts that have a similar percent of English learners, you can add that, and you can use the filter in a similar way to filter that. You can uncheck this box to remove districts that don't have data for a certain element, but beware that that does remove it completely from your comparison. And you can also check these boxes if you want to see averages for the state. And if you want to get rid of a data element, you can click that red X over there. And again, those 3 dots in any of these sections enable you to see all the data elements in that section. Over here in the student performance, we have the Casp results, again, the statewide standardized tests, and you can look at them by level, or you can look at the student that met or exceeded standards by gender and by ethnicity. There's a useful filter with ethnicity where you can also filter out any groups that, if you don't have a lot of students and you want to reduce it, the proportion of those students, you can reduce it using that ethnicity filter. And again, if you want to remove it, once you've looked at it, you can remove it completely. So to get on down here, we don't have suspensions and expulsions data yet, but we will soon. So for now, I'm going to close that off. And I'm going to close off the graduation data just to make this a little bit smaller. Over here under staff, we're still trying to get the 17-18 staffing data. Hope to have it soon. So I'm going to remove this one, but from the staff data elements, we can pull up the teacher salary, average teacher salary, and you can use this little sort button here to look at average teacher salary. It always sorts lowest first and then highest. Now, if we don't want YOLO, we can unpin it. And so now it's showing us that New Haven, Unified, and Alameda has by far the highest average teacher salary. And then there are a bunch that don't have data. And then we have Oakland Unified down here. You can also look at the highest salary offered and the lowest salary offered. I'm not sure why it's, and again, if you don't want to see NAs, you can uncheck the include missing data box and it'll remove any districts. As I mentioned earlier, the J90 data from which teacher salary information come is a voluntary form, and so not all districts report that. And then coming down to the financial data, and I should pause, are there any questions, Gurpreet, that need answering before I get into this?
Christine is asking, when doing comparison, can you filter it to only show district data, excluding data from charter schools?
The filter doesn't allow you to filter out the charter school data right now. At the school level, if you want to just look at one district, you can come into the school level. And so suppose we pick a district here. Suppose we look at Oakland, if I spell it correctly. And I didn't save it, sorry. And save. So now it's reduced it to 126 schools. Again, in the summary, you can pick charter school, yes, no. And then you can use the filter to select no charters, and then it will only show you the data for that district. So you can do that filtering at the school level, and then you could export that data into Excel and do further aggregations if you wanted to. But at the district level, it shows all the data that are reported for the district. And I don't think all data are, like, we need to clarify this with our other colleagues at the data reporting office, but I think the graduation data do not include charter school grad rates. Does that sound right, Gurpreet? But we can clarify that if you want to send us an email at data.org. But again, while we have Christine here, I want to come back to the finance elements in the comparisons, and just show you another cool little thing, which is that if you leave your comparison and it changes your settings, you can use the recently viewed options, and it should, oops, it's taking me back to the district. There should be an option that takes you back to the comparison as you had selected it. I think I may have clicked the wrong one. But anyway, going back to the financial data, it defaults to the current expense of education. And then you can add, if you wanted to look at total expenditures, or if it's sometimes easier to obviously compare when you're looking at per student expenditures. So if you wanted to see which district had the highest per student expenditures, you could select that and then filter by it. And again, this is because we've got Davis pinned. And Christine, can you tell us why sometimes we get these really, really high numbers, but those are kind of anomalies in the data?
New Jerusalem, I think it has to do with the fact that they have a lot, I think they have a lot of charter school students. And so I think somehow the way they're reporting their expenditures is skewing or not giving the right relation to their own district students versus the charter school students.
I see.
That recently came to my attention, and we just have to take that. We probably need to follow up with them, but just haven't had time to look at it. But that's an exception. We rarely see. Well, what are those? Yeah, New Jerusalem is just an exception.
Yeah. Well, even Big Sur seems a bit high.
Yeah, what are these? Yeah, maybe those are little, and if they're little districts too, little with a little, little enrollment, small enrollment, sometimes the way they're recording their expenditures might be skewing the data, and it doesn't immediately come to our attention just in our general review, but so it's hard to say right now what's causing that. But like I said, a lot of times it's probably either charter school related or just the fact that they're small.
Okay, yeah. So for example, Big Sur has 114.
Yeah.
And Desert Center has 15.
Yeah.
So, so we still have Christine here. Are there any other questions for Christine? Questions about anything we've talked about?
No, there's a question about the teacher salary average. They're asking if the teacher salary average is mean or median.
Average would be mean, I believe, right, Christine? Does that?
Yeah. Yeah, if it's average, yeah.
Yeah, I believe it's the. I can double check that if you would.
Right.
I think we should have your email, but I'm pretty sure that it's the mean. Not the median. Any other questions?
No, that's about it.
Okay. Well, Christine, it's just so awesome to have you and your insights on the site. I can't tell you how much we appreciate it, and our partnership with you on this.
Oh, well, it's my pleasure. I'm glad we do have this partnership.
Yeah, it's really great. We love working. I just want to say this to the folks, and thank you. I see more than 55 people have stuck it out this long, and we love working on Ed Data because the people who use Ed Data care about it so much, and we hear about that. And so please stay in touch with us. Down here at the bottom of the page, you can sign up for our email list. We don't spam, but we will let you know when there's new data or if we're doing another webinar or when this recording is posted. But you can also email us over here, and we try to respond promptly to emails. We appreciate your feedback. If there's something missing that you need us to add, we take those suggestions very seriously. I did see a question by someone about why we haven't changed the grid line so the lines don't run into each other, and that is an ongoing discussion we've had about how do we, within the limitations of the technology that we have, how can we make the graphs more readable? So if you find that to be a problem, let us know. You know, that really helps us understand how much of a priority that should be. Data does operate on a total shoestring budget, and it's a labor of love for all of us. So we do sometimes have to kind of pick and choose where we put our attention, but what matters to you matters to us. So keep in touch with us. So if there's nothing else, are there any more questions?
No, there aren't
If
any.
there's nothing, then I just want to say thank you to Christine, Gurpreet, Amy, Andrew, and to all of you out there who've joined us, taken time out of your Thursday afternoon to join us for this. We really appreciate it. We appreciate you, and we look forward to staying in touch.